Sarada, like her father Sasuke and his predecessors before him, will eventually go blind. That is the trade-off for attaining the power of the mangekyo. It isn't eternal, but it can be. You see, there are multiple ways in which Sarada can awaken the eternal mangekyo Sharingan, and one of those ways would be to take the eyes of Madara Uchiha. Now this might sound crazy since Madara died at the end of Naruto's manga. This was after the tail beasts were extracted from his body and he was separated from Kaguya, which of course would result in his death as was the case for the other Jinchuriki. So one would assume that Madara wouldn't play an important part in the story going forward, but there are ways to make it happen. You see, Madara's soul did leave the mortal plane but his body remained, which of course includes his eyes that attain the power of the Rinnegan. Now this might sound familiar since it happened before. The Rinnegans that were used by Nagato and Obito belonged to Madara. He implanted his eyes into Kid Nagato's eye sockets without him knowing, and then died of old age sometime afterwards. Obito showed that it was also possible to maintain these eyes in some kind of liquid or stasis pod, which is how he preserved the eyes from the Uchiha clan massacre for multiple years. The point is that it's very easy for the writer to make this happen if he wanted to, and it would make perfect sense if he did. With that said, one thing to point out is that the eternal mangekyo is formed when one implants the eyes of a close blood relative. The powers of both eyes will then combine into one, thus attaining an eternal light which the writer visualized with the Shinigami that had two empty eye sockets that were then filled by the light of the new eyes. So this process can be done by using the eyes of a parent, sibling, or even a very close cousin. Though it is important to note that it was never stated that one has to be a very close blood relative or family member. Itachi simply said that it had to be a blood relative that's a clansman, which could be anyone in the Uchiha clan since they're all connected by blood and share the same ancestor. I will say that it makes more sense that it has to be a close blood relative since Obito didn't use any of the Sharingans from the massacre to awaken his own eternal mangekyo. Though of course that could be because none of them had the mangekyo, which was also never stated to be a necessity, but even if it was, we know that Sasuke's father had the mangekyo, so there's that. Either way, I do think it's very plausible for Sarada to awaken the eternal mangekyo using Madara's eyes since her father shares a deep connection to him. That of course being the fact that they're both reincarnates of Indra, which would make Sasuke Madara's next life. And this was also brought up by Madara in the war as well, when he said that Sasuke having the Chokutome mangekyo is likely because they share a connection deeper than blood, which is also why he thought Sasuke's eyes would work perfectly for him. So since Madara is Indra and Sasuke is Madara and Indra, wouldn't that be a close enough connection for Sarada to awaken the eternal mangekyo using Madara's eyes? There's also the fact that similar to Madara and their father Sasuke, Sarada also has the Chokutome mangekyo, which again led Madara to believe that he and Sasuke shared a connection deeper than blood. Despite the fact that Madara himself of course didn't awaken the Chokutome, he gained it after taking the eyes of his brother Izuna to awaken the eternal mangekyo. But I addressed that in the Sarada Chokutome video, so more information on that in that video if you want it. The point is that Madara shares a close enough connection to Sarada by simply being a previous incarnation of her father, so it can work if the writer wants it to. Another thing to point out is that this might be how Sarada gains the power of the Rinnegan. Yes, Madara's Rinnegans were deactivated when he died since he only had his Sharingans activated. At least that is what happened in the anime version of events. In the manga, his eyes were hazed and grayed out similar to Itachi's when he was on the verge of death. Some took this to mean that Madara went blind for some reason, but that certainly wasn't the case. Madara had the eternal mangekyo, which means that his eyes will never lose their light. So the hazed effect or grayed out effect shown in the manga is simply what Kishimoto and many manga authors use when a character is dying, which is likely why it was changed for the anime. But even if it was the case that he lost his light for some reason, we know for a fact that this doesn't mean that the eyes are dead, as seen by Sasuke using Itachi's eyeballs to this day. This just means that the power was sealed off, which is the downside to attaining such power as explained by Itachi, but it can be reawakened by implanting that eye into the eye socket of a blood relative, preferably a parent or sibling. So whether we use the anime where Madara died with the Sharingans active or the manga continuity, the eyes are still usable if preserved. Now, as I mentioned before, in addition to Madara no longer having the Sharingans activated in the manga continuity, we can also see that the Rinnegan mysteriously disappeared. However, this doesn't mean that he lost the dojutsu, since it was shown that Madara could deactivate and activate his Rinnegans whenever he wants to, as seen when he activated both his Rinnegans to absorb Naruto's Rasengan, and when he later met Hashirama with only one of his Rinnegans activated. So we can come to the logical conclusion that Madara only having his Sharingans activated at the point of death per the anime continuity wasn't because he lost his Rinnegans for some unknown reason, but more so because he was heavily fatigued and couldn't maintain using it. Now, it was explained by Kakashi in part 1 that they normally burn a ninja's body upon the point of death, so the corpse doesn't yield up the secrets to the skills the body once held. In fact, the reason why Tobirama didn't burn Madara's body the first time he died was because he wanted to gain the secrets to Madara's powers. So while we can say that they likely burned Madara's body along with his eyes after the war, I would say that it makes more sense, or it's more likely that they burned the body but kept the eyes. It would be rather foolish to destroy the eyes that has the power to use the most powerful dojutsu in existence at that point in time. And it is somewhat easy to preserve these eyes, as seen with Obito having jars filled with eyeballs of the Uchihas killed during the Uchiha clan massacre that happened over 8 to 9 years prior to that point. So it would be safe to say that they probably have those eyes locked away or gave it to Orochimaru for safekeeping or something. Now that we've explained how Sarada could get these eyes, let's get into how it can boost her power. So we know that the Rinnegan is made up of Hagoromo's 6 paths chakra, which is why the only way to unlock the dojutsu is by merging Ashura's and Indra's chakra to obtain Hagoromo's chakra, as stated by Madara. The other way to awaken this power is by getting the eye directly from Hagoromo himself, which was the case for Sasuke as stated in the databooks. Though it is important to note that it appears that one needs to be on the verge of death as well, as was the case for Sasuke and Madara when they both awakened the Rinnegan. So if Sarada gets Madara's eye, she might not trigger the Rinnegan until she's on the verge of death, as was her predecessors. With that said, if Sarada does get Madara's Rinnegans, she will receive a 6 paths chakra buff, since the Rinnegan does supply chakra and power to the body. And we know for a fact that dojutsus do supply chakras, confirmed by Obito when he stated that the chakra and power of Madara's Rinnegans was too much for him to handle. We also have Sasuke stating that he can feel Itachi's power flowing into him after implanting Itachi's eyes to awaken the eternal mangekyo Sharingan. This is also backed up by Kakashi, saying that he can feel the 6 paths chakra in Obito's eyes after Obito gave them back to him during the fight with Kaguya. So what Obito's situation proved is that it doesn't work in one way, or doesn't just work in one way. Dojutsu does amp your chakra and power, but your chakra and power can also amp your dojutsu, as seen by Obito's regular Sharingans being amped by the 6 paths chakra supplied from his body through Madara's Rinnegan. Now what this means is that not only are Madara's Rinnegan's 6 paths chakra amped, they're also Tentail's Jinchuriki amped and Hashirama's Cell amped, as was Obito's right eye, which is why he never went blind from using the Mangekyo Sharingan even though he doesn't have the Eternal Mangekyo. Now we're gonna take these Rinnegans and implant them into Sarada, which means that she will likely be amped by all that power as well and receive the same benefits. Now the funny thing about this is that this isn't even the scary part. If we go back to Naruto when Obito betrayed Madara and fought alongside Kakashi, Madara, when thinking about how he should kill them, said, "Maybe I should just get it over with quickly and use Limbo." Then said, "No, I shouldn't while Obito has my Rinnegan," which of course is referring to his left eye. Now why would Madara not use Limbo in front of Obito just because he has his Rinnegan? Is Tentail's Madara afraid that a weakened half-dying Obito would somehow defeat him, or is Limbo when Limbo clones are stated to be equal to the user in all aspects? I don't think that's the case. I think it's more likely that Madara didn't want to use Limbo in front of Obito because if he did, Obito would likely become aware of the ability and use it for himself since he has one of Madara's Rennegans. Now with multiple Limbos with Rinnegan, 6 paths chakra and Kamui hacks, along with everyone else on the battlefield, it would have likely been more difficult for Madara to win that battle. By the way, for the Boruto fans watching this video, Limbo clones reside in another plane of existence, so someone existing in this plane of existence wouldn't be able to sense or see them, and they also have every ability of the original user, so they're pretty busted. So if we give Sarada Madara's eyes and she triggers his Rinnegan, which she should be able to do since Madara was able to activate Obito's mangekyo and so was Kakashi, it shouldn't be that different since the Rinnegan is an evolved Sharingan. Sasuke wasn't able to deactivate his eye for some reason, likely because he didn't awaken it naturally over time, but Madara certainly could, as pointed out earlier. So if Sarada triggers his Rinnegan and someone just tells her about Limbo, she should be able to use the ability. Another possibility is that she might gain her own unique Rinnegan ability. This makes sense because every Rinnegan user seems to gain additional unique abilities even though they all possess Hagoromo's Rinnegan, in the sense that Madara awakened Hagoromo's chakra to awaken Hagoromo's Rinnegan, but he also gained a unique ability Hagoromo never displayed, which was Limbo. Then we have Sasuke, who got the Rinnegan from Hagoromo himself, but manifested an ability to switch places with an object and an ability to travel through dimensions. Both abilities Hagoromo never displayed, but maybe he could use the last one and he just didn't. But yeah, what this means is that Sarada might unlock a new unique Rinnegan ability when Madara's Rinnegan mixes with her DNA and mutates, which is my hypothesis on why each Rinnegan user gains a unique ability even though they all possess Hagoromo's Rinnegan. It's by way of genetic mutation or maybe chakra combination. The only Uchiha who didn't awaken a unique dojutsu ability upon getting Hagoromo's Rinnegan was Obito, but he could barely handle the power of the Rinnegan and opted to not use most of its unique abilities for this very reason. Now as it relates to Sarada, these are just the Rinnegan abilities. We don't even know what her next mangekyo ability after Ohirume will be, which would be separate from anything the Rinnegan provides of course, but those powers will be amplified by her having the Eternal Mangekyo Sharingan Jubi 6 Paths Chakra Amped Rennegans. Speaking of Hashirama cells, another way for Sarada to not go blind while using Mangekyo is simply by having Hashirama cells implanted into her body. And though it wasn't confirmed in the manga itself, it is likely, very likely, that this is the reason why Obito never went blind despite spamming the Mangekyo since the age of 12, nor did he have any side effects. Now of course there is danger in doing this because most people don't survive the integration of Hashirama cells into their bodies, but I'd argue that it should work for Sarada since it worked for both Madara and their father, Sasuke. Now another way for Sarada to awaken the Eternal Mangekyo is by taking the Eye of Sasuke, not the one that he has left, which initially belonged to Itachi, but the ones he discarded. This of course is very plausible since Obito likely stored those eyes in his lab after implanting Itachi's, and given the fact that Sasuke has been to that lab, he should know where it is. And I know some like to say that Sasuke destroyed the lab, but that was never stated or shown. All Sasuke did was destroy the entrance to that building while battling the White Zetsu when he decided to leave. Nothing suggests that Sasuke destroyed the entire lab or the contents within it. Now obviously those eyes wouldn't have survived for so long without some kind of maintenance, so it is also possible that Sasuke went back for them and stored them away in some sort of stasis pod, which means that it's either in the hands of the Leaf Village or Orochimaru. So maybe Sasuke saved them because of some sentimental value attached to them and later for the day his daughter would need them. The only issue with this is whether or not this would work for Sarada. As I pointed out in my video on why Itachi didn't just swap eyes with Sasuke, swapping eyes wouldn't work because one has to go blind and lose access to their Sharingan. You see, what most people missed during Itachi's explanation of the Eternal Mangekyo Sharingan is how Kishimoto chose to visualize this process and certain key words that were used. Now one of these visual elements used was this weird looking Shinigami. It had the Rinnegan symbol on his forehead and 2 additional eyes, which only manifested after Madara took his Zuna's eyes. We know this to be true because when Itachi showed his own Shinigami, it also had 4 eye sockets, but only had 2 eyes. And that's because, as Itachi puts it, Sasuke has his spare eyes. So if Itachi had taken Sasuke's eyes, his Shinigami would look similar to Madara's after he took his Zuna's, thus achieving its true transformation. Now does this mean that the Shinigami is a real thing that is actually there, a phantom haunting the cursed Uchiha? Not necessarily. It could be, but it could also be the case that Kishimoto is simply using it to show what's happening when someone awakens the Eternal Mangekyo. Now one could argue that if Itachi was successful in taking the eyes of Sasuke, wouldn't Sasuke then be able to take Itachi's discarded eyes for himself, then fill the missing slots of his own Shinigami and awaken EMS for himself as well? Well, we've already established that the story outright portrays this to not be the case multiple times. First, in the case where Madara took the eyes of his brother Izuna, the story portrays it as Madara killing his brother to strengthen his powers. Both by Itachi coming to the conclusion that killing a blood relative allows one to obtain eternal ocular powers, and Obito, while pretending to be Madara, describing it as a sacrifice. If this was the case, that the discarded eyes would still be usable after one achieves the eternal mangekyo, there would be no need to kill one sibling. They could simply swap eyes and everyone would have an eternal mangekyo, or at least still possess a usable dojutsu. So the question isn't whether Sasuke would be able to do this, but more so why isn't he? Now the answer to this question can only be one thing, which is that once an Uchiha takes the eyes of a blood relative, the power of their own eyes gets sealed away. So once Madara implanted the eyes of Izuna, his own eyeballs became unusable, and the light they once possessed was then combined with Izuna's. So even if Izuna was to take Madara's eyes, not only wouldn't he awaken the eternal mangekyo, he would also be blind, and the Shinigami's eye slots would be empty. That is what it means to awaken the eternal mangekyo. One isn't just stealing the eyes of the other person, they're also taking the light which reflects that power into them. That is also why the physical change of the mangekyo's pattern happens as well. When Sasuke took Itachi's eyes, he still kept his own mangekyo pattern, which then merged with Itachi's. The same thing happened when Madara took the eyes of Izuna, but why? Why did they retain the old pattern and abilities despite losing the eyes that manifested them? Well, some would argue that since the powers of the Uchiha comes from the chakra released from the brain, the Uchiha should be able to manifest that power in any eyeball. Now the problem with this argument is that it's shown not to be the case multiple times. Obito never manifested his left mangekyo powers or design in the spare Sharingan he used for years. And the same thing with Madara after he gave his eyes to Nagato, and even when he took Akashi's eyes in the war as well. So even though the powers of the Sharingan reflects the heart, which then releases chakra from the brain itself into the eyeballs, the spare eyes used by Madara and Obito for decades never manifested their powers or the dojutsu design. This process only occurs when eyes are taken from a blood relative, who then goes on to awaken the eternal mangekyo. So the eye that is discarded then loses its light, and so does the person a new pair was taken from, which is why this process is seen as a sacrifice. So since the light of Sasuke's Sharingan was already transferred into his eternal mangekyo, would Sarada be able to use his old eyes? I don't think so. The same way Izuna couldn't just take Madara's discarded eyes and use them for himself, and why Sasuke wouldn't have been able to do the same thing if Itachi was able to take his eyes. Now I could be wrong, of course, and maybe since Sarada is the third person in a transfer, then that makes it possible to reawaken those eyes for some reason. Now Madara's eyes of course wouldn't have this problem since those eyes have the eternal mangekyo, so that seems like a better bet. Who knows, maybe Sarada takes Hidari's eyes and this video was all for naught. With that said, that is it for the video. If you guys liked it, drop a like down below and subscribe if you're new. And also, if you guys want to learn more about Sarada's Ohirume and her possible next mangekyo ability, watch the video on screen. There might be something else, you guys can choose whatever one you want to, but yeah. I'll see you guys on the next one. Peace.